Hello, my name is Duncan-O'Neill. I'm an assistant professor in 19th century European art history here at OU, and today we'll be talking about Madame de Pompadour and French patronage. We'll also have a little beheading at the end. So the topic of our talk today will be two female art patrons from 18th century France, Madame de Pompadour, the woman on the left, and Marie Antoinette, the woman on the right. Now, these aren't women artists. Instead, they're patrons of art. And a patron is someone who commissions and pays for an artwork. And we'll talk about how an art patron can impact and influence how an image looks. We'll also discuss today the ways in which one patron, Madame de Pompadour, participated in the commissioning and construction of a really interesting portrait, the artwork you see on the left. We'll talk about how this portrait and the painting you see at right, Marie Antoinette and her children, how these functioned as kind of propaganda for these women, and how these paintings served their broader ambitions and goals. Before we dig into these portraits, let me give you a little context for 18th century France. On the left, you see a portrait of Louis XIV, the king who commissioned the Palace of Versailles, the grand Baroque French structure that you see at right. Louis is part of the Bourbon monarchy in France, and he greatly encouraged the arts, as did his successor, Louis XV, especially by building this chateau, the Chateau of Versailles, the Palace of Versailles, outside of Paris, and filling it with artwork. This palace was a massive statement in the French Baroque and also a symbol of Louis XIV's ambition. This was also a way to move the court away from the center of Paris, just outside the city, in order to control the court a bit more. The palace was a symbol of absolute power, designed for this very top-down absolutist message. The luxury, the opulence, the scale of the palace communicated a set of values. This was a monarchy, this was a court that valued pleasure and opulence and believed that wealth was a demonstration of divine favor. So all the gold filigree, the sort of elaborately ornate doorknobs, the size of the palace itself, this all showed God's favor for King Louis XIV. And they also deployed magnificence, this kind of awe-inspiring, these awe-inspiring spaces had a kind of political function. Art and architecture at this moment was meant to wow you, to awe you, to distract you. And it wasn't, and this is pretty important, it wasn't necessarily intended to educate you or communicate strong moral messages. Life at Versailles was incredibly beholden to ritual. You can see in this sort of silly painting at right that the king got out of bed with the help of about 100 attendants. He followed a very precise schedule. There was this very rigid, ritualized structure to court life. And when I say court, I mean the aristocratic families, the counselors, the ladies in waiting, the administrators of government, that all worked and lived around the palace. And depending on the day, there were between 3,000 and 10,000 people at court, forming a kind of mini society, almost a mini city, governed by a very strict hierarchy and very strict rules of etiquette. There were meticulous rules about body language and manners, especially in the presence of the royal family. And this kind of rigid and hierarchical structure mirrored the structure of broader society. the 17th and 18th centuries in France was a time of very little means of upward mobility. So if you were born into a peasant family, if your father was a farmer, the chances were almost certain that you would die a farmer yourself. Same thing if you were born into a noble family. It didn't matter how talented or how you managed your money, you would die as part of the nobility also. So there wasn't really room to break into other classes or social strata. This rigid social structure was broken by this extraordinary woman, Jeanne Antoinette Poisson, who would become a marquise and eventually be called Madame de Pompadour. So be given this alternative title. Now, for those of you who know a tiny bit of French or have seen The Little Mermaid, you might know that Jeanne Poisson means that she was born Jane Fish. This is not a noble name. She was born instead to a middle-class family, not a noble family, but she was a mistress of opportunity, an incredibly savvy and ambitious social climber. She used her incredible beauty as well as learned skills in etiquette and seduction, and played into the Baroque codes of etiquette during the period she was alive in order to break through the boundaries of the social order, so to rise above the middle class status that she was born into. First, she became the lover of the director of arts. This is the highest arts administrator in France, who assisted in her social advancement. She became a famous salonière. This is a woman who hosts dinner parties, specifically where art and culture were discussed. And through this, she garnered great social cachet, so kind of gained this important social status. In 1745, Jane Fish, Jeanne Poisson, became the mistress to Louis XV, the King of France, which was an official court position, which is just the most French thing you could ever hear of, right? A mistress being an official position. She became the Queen's Lady in Waiting in 1756, and this was a very prestigious position at court. Again, something official that gave her access to spaces and social events at court. And she was really the de facto minister and later the platonic consort of the king. So even after their relationship ended, she maintains her kind of influence on him, especially when consulting on arts patronage. So Louis XV really relied upon her opinions and expertise in terms of what artists to hire for palace projects or for government projects, what kind of art he wanted to commission. So she wielded power of arts administration through her relationship with the king. She was also herself an artist. She did engravings. So using her relationships, using her sort of charisma and smarts, she acquires power and importantly maintains her power. Her younger brother, a man called Marigny, became the next director of the arts, and she, of course, had some influence over his decisions. So art became a means of her upward mobility, of her social status, and was tied very much to her beauty, just as art is sort of valued for beauty on its own terms. The artist who created this incredible portrait, Francois Boucher, his career was tied incredibly closely to Madame de Pompadour. She was the private patron of Boucher. She commissioned many paintings from him for important royal spaces. So as Madame de Pompadour rose through the social ranks to the top of the royal court, first by association with the director of the arts, And then the king, she was given the opportunity to steer royal commissions and become a patron in her own right, and brings Boucher along for the ride. But this rigid social structure was broken quite rarely and uniquely by this woman, Jeanne Antoinette Poisson, who would become a marquise, would become part of the court, and eventually change her name, gain a noble title, and become the Madame de Pompadour. Now, Jeanne Poisson, this woman's given name, if you know any French or have seen The Little Mermaid, you know that this means Jane Fish. So she wasn't born into the nobility. She was born into the middle class. But she was a very savvy character, a mistress of opportunity. She was ambitious and a social climber. And she used her incredible beauty and knowledge of etiquette and seduction to play into the Baroque codes of social life in order to break the boundaries of the broader hierarchy. So she was born into the middle class, but became a lover of the director of arts, the kind of highest arts administrator in the government, who assisted her in her social advancement. She became a famous salonière. This is a woman who hosts dinner parties where art and culture are discussed, garnering great social cachet. And I should say that, of course, this is a time, the 18th century in France, where women had no means of sort of official jobs where they could influence, kind of have power to influence the administration of government, right? There was no women's administrators. Women couldn't be generals. They, didn't have a lot of say-so or power. And so this kind of cultural influence was an important and really one of the only existing ways where women could influence their broader society. In 1745, Madame de Pompadour became mistress to Louis XV, which was an official court position, which is just the most French thing you've ever heard of. She became the Queen's Lady in Waiting in 1756. And again, this is an important position that allowed her to continue to have access to court functions and spaces. And the king, she wasn't just a kind of romantic interest of the king. He really relied on her advice and support. She acted as a kind of de facto minister, influencing especially the royal arts patronage. So what art the king and the government would commission for their sort of massive government projects and spaces. So she really wielded an incredible amount of power of arts administration, despite her inability to hold, to become, say, the director of the arts herself. So she uses art and culture to acquire power and also to maintain it. And she even convinces the king to install her younger brother, a man called Marigny, to become the next director of the arts. So art becomes a means of upward mobility and is tied to beauty, right? Both her beauty and the beauty of the art itself. Now, the artist who created this incredible portrait in front of you is named Francois Boucher. His career was tied closely with Madame de Pompadour. She was the private patron of Boucher, which means that she commissioned paintings from him for important royal spaces. So as Madame de Pompadour rose through the social ranks to the top of the royal court, first by her association with the director of the arts, and then eventually when she was given the opportunity to steer royal commissions and be a patron herself, she brings this artist, Boucher, along for the ride. Boucher would benefit from this artist-patron relationship. Madame de Pompadour was his patroness from 1747 until her death in 1764, so for nearly 20 years. And he used this patronage at some of the highest levels of the French court to become one of the best loved artists in 18th century France, exhibiting his work in some of the most elite spaces. And this painting, The Toilette of Venus, was commissioned by Madame de Pompadour. It was designed to form part of this integrated decorative scheme of a relatively private interior space. And something I should tell you is that mistresses tended to have short careers, right? Mainly associated with their youth. And typically held their amorous associations with kings or powerful men for short periods of time. And this was a moment, of course, the 18th century in France, when women could not have sort of official placements of power, right? Women were not government administrators. They were not heads of banks or generals in the army. So their sort of Madame de Pompadour's amorous association with the king was the way that she was able to sort of claw some power in the midst of this incredibly misogynist system. And Madame de Pompadour was very savvy. She knew, right, that her association with the king would be, quite brief, even if it was, several years. That's brief in the course of a lifetime. So she was given land by the king in between Paris and Versailles, and very quickly snapped it up and built a chateau called Bellevue, which I'll show you on the next slide. This is a little drawing of Bellevue. It means, beautiful view. This was quite small for palace standards, but, it still has 3 wings. It's still a pretty nice mini palace here. And this was the space in which she hung the previous painting, Venus at her Toilette. She hung it in one of 3 rooms forming the bathing apartments in her own personal space. This is a suite on the ground floor flanking the courtyard. Now the face of Venus here, the goddess of love and beauty, should look a bit to you like the portrait of Madame de Pompadour that we've seen already. Venus is also thought to have brought his mistress to the king's mind because she had once performed, kind of acted as Venus in an opera ballet staged at Versailles in February 1750. This is one thing the aristocracy would do, hold little skits and plays at the palace to pass the time. And the toilette, it's not toilet, the toilette is a kind of vanity. This is a space where women get ready, make themselves up. And this was a very popular contemporary subject in the 18th century, which may have led Boucher to depict Venus, this goddess, a Roman goddess, in a kind of quasi modern, and by that I mean 18th century interior, furnished with taffeta and velvet and embroidered damask, finished with gold braid and tassels. So this impossibly elaborate 18th century divan or couch that she sits on supports a gilded puto, this little angel figure. Down on the left-hand side, there's a shell-shaped basin with pearls spilling out of it. These are all attributes of Venus, the goddess. And before entering the collection of the Metropolitan Museum in New York, this painting hung in the boudoir, again, the kind of private apartment space of New York society hostess Mrs. William K. Vanderbilt. This is an exciting footnote of collecting, if not patronage. So another important woman who claimed her own influence and power through arts patronage. But back to 1751.
In this painting, Boucher delights in the Rococo taste of court culture of the moment. Um, Again, this is not a painter who feels the need to address politics or the public in this painting. Again, it was going into a private space in the mistress's, Madame de Pompidou's own chateau. And Boucher doesn't feel the need to offer some statement about grand moral meanings or values. Instead, he advocates for the evacuation of content for the sake of pleasure. He imagines an audience as being elite courtiers, right, in Versailles, or the few people who were able to enter the bedrooms and bathing apartments of this very elite woman. So this is a painting that offers pleasure instead of a serious message, but, and we'll explore this more in the next painting, pleasure can offer its own kind of message.
Boucher would eventually replace Venus, that stand-in for Madame de Pompadour, with the woman herself in this painting, Jeanne Antoinette Poisson, Marquise de Pompadour. We're seeing the Madame at her toilette, or at her vanity again. She's getting ready here. She holds a little brass box of blush in her right hand and a small brush in her right hand, and she's looking presumably at a mirror in front of her. She's in a kind of dressing gown. This would not be a dress you would wear outside the house, but something you would wear, kind of a robe to get ready. But you can see, of course, how elaborate it is, what fine materials it's made out of. This gives you a sense of her elegance and wealth. I'm just narrowing in here for a moment so you can look at the incredible detail in this painting, how Boucher describes the different textures of lace in contrast to the sort of stiff pink ribbons, and to show you how that brush is loaded down with the pink of the pigment. This painting was owned by Madame de Pompadour's brother, Marigny, and so it was intended for a private audience, right? This wasn't in a government building, but an audience of art administrators. Okay, so this is going to be important to its meaning here. And Melissa Hyde, in the article about this painting, tells us that the love affair between Madame de Pompadour and Louis XV, the king, had ended in 1756. Although, right, her friendship and influence continued after the romantic relationship ended. So she continued to have an influence over the arts, over arts administration and matters of state. And the cameo that you see on the bracelet on the screen is a portrait of Louis XV. So this is a demonstration of their continued friendship and association here. And so the argument is that this painting was commissioned by Madame de Pompadour in order to emphasize her continued power at a kind of moment of political vulnerability, right after her relationship formally ends, and to consolidate her power in this new kind of post-mistress period. So this painting is more complex than just a woman at her vanity. This painting is about the representation of identity, about this specific woman's class identity and gender identity, and even her artistic identity. She shows herself as a patron who used art as a vehicle for self-fashioning. So that used art as a vehicle to define her identity for a public. And again, one of the main strategies is that she demonstrates this powerful association with the king, that she's seeking to secure her place in the nobility, in this realm of the cultural elite, after she has stopped being a mistress. Now, we need to consider color in this painting in order to understand its meaning fully. Not only in these shimmering silvery grays, the pink and blue ribbons, color is also emphasized on the brush, right, saturated with pigment that she paints her face with. Color was associated with the notion of artifice and cosmetics, and there was an equivalence between the subject matter of this painting with makeup, with cosmetics, and the medium of this painting, oil paint, at the moment that Boucher made this. So paint and cosmetics were associated with each other both by critics of Rococo painting and its supporters. So here I'm showing you a quote by Roger de Piel, who was a director of the Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture in the 18th century. And he's one person who believed that, yes, painting, right, oil painting is like makeup. He says, quote, "It is true that this is makeup, but we should wish that all current paintings were made up this way. We already know that all painting is only makeup, that part of its essence is to deceive, and that the greatest deceiver in this art is the greatest painter." So de Piel is making this association between artworks, right, oil painting and makeup. Both, after all, right, are pigments applied to a surface, often to make that surface more beautiful. But you can sense here, right, a defensiveness about deception in cosmetics that some critics used. There was a criticism of Rococo art, the style of art that Boucher is participating in, that art became too feminine at this moment. And this was centered, this kind of critique was centered around the use of cosmetics. So these imbricated discourses devalued the style of the Rococo, the style of the Palace of Versailles, the style of the paintings and sculptures and artworks commissioned by the government at this time as feminine. But this devaluation, calling the art of the monarchy feminine, was part of this kind of Enlightenment critique of elite culture. So it was a way to criticize the excess of the king, the kind of taste and values of the king. So the issue of cosmetics was, in essence, a serious one, right? This kind of conflation about paint and art and makeup had these deeper implications about the status of art and the values of government at this time. So makeup was something that was both mocked and celebrated, I said. This is an example of it being mocked. This is an extreme example. And this is actually a caricature by a British artist, Thomas Rowlandson, from the 18th century. And it mocks the extreme measures that an aging socialite pursues to look young and beautiful. This mocks a specific woman, Lady Sarah Archer. She was a well-known socialite in 18th century England. And we're supposed to read this caricature starting with the top left, moving right, going down to the bottom right, and then moving left. So essentially, she starts out as a bald, toothless woman, lacking an eye with scrawny arms and sagging breasts. Then Rowlandson shows her progressively mending herself, right, by inserting a false eye and teeth, putting on a wig, transforming her face and arms with cosmetics to appear more youthful. She applies fashionable clothes, jewelry, rouge, to complete the illusion until, at the lower left, she's ready to leave for a masquerade, which is a kind of extra layer of joke onto this indictment here. So makeup was a key issue for class critique of the aristocracy in 18th century France, and was feared as this kind of vehicle of feminine deceit. The English Parliament in the 18th century even passed a law that allowed men to dissolve a marriage if they believed their wives had relied on artificial means to disguise their age during courtship. And we can think about, I'm sure, as you're listening to this, you're thinking about contemporary parallels, right? With, the Kim Kardashians, the sort of body modifications and cosmetics and social media filters. These themes really persist over time, and are often really undergirded by fears of women's empowerment and self-fashioning. In France, for instance, makeup was also tied explicitly to women's independence and agency. It was seen as an activity that exceeded the control of male institutions. So here we have another kind of caricature or cartoon. It's a little harder to read, but you see women, four women kind of gabbing together in their own space. And the title gives away the message here. It's called Painting Without Mastery, or The Toilette, right? Another vanity scene. So the fear here, painting without mastery, is that there's no apprenticeship one needs to go through in order to use cosmetics, right? There was no academy that's run by, in the 18th century, a man who could control the kind of standards and values of its application. So this results in fears that women are acquiring skills outside of male institutions, and that women can alter themselves in a way that can falsify their position in the strict social hierarchy, right? That they can use cosmetics, that they can use this kind of artificial screen to beautify themselves and look like a member of the nobility, right? Move beyond the rigid social system in place. So both Boucher and Madame de Pompadour know all this. They know the implications about women's agency. They know the associations between makeup and oil painting at their moment. And so in commissioning a painting of herself applying makeup, the Marquise de Pompadour was risking an engagement in these debates about cosmetics. She knew what she was doing here. So this painting becomes, with this context, a real sign of female ambition. These pretensions to wealth and elegance and learning that are evident in the painting here become really visible to us, right? She's deploying fashion and cosmetics to show wealth and elegance, the same values that were on display at Versailles, right? That showed a kind of divine or official favor. There are also, right, pretensions to artistic freedom. Madame de Pompadour is making up her own face, right? She is applying pigment to a surface, in this case her face, to make it more beautiful. So she's celebrating the artifice of paint, knowingly, right, referencing this positive alignment between cosmetics and painting, saying that ornamentation is okay, right? Pleasure and beauty are okay, but also that she is the agent of that beautification. She is having a hand, quite literally, right? She has a brush in her hand at constructing herself, at managing how she is perceived in the world. We see Madame de Pompadour holding the blush brush in her left hand. And what you should know is that left-handedness is a convention of self-portraits in art. Because artists were often looking at themselves in a mirror in order to paint their self-portraits, the paintings came out with the brush in their left hands. And so there's an argument that what we're seeing in Boucher's painting is a kind of self-portrait, right? The mirror that we assume, right, that she's looking at herself in to construct her, to put her makeup on, could also be a kind of canvas. So in painting herself, right, she's not only painting her face, but Boucher is positioning her as an artist, right, constructing her own self-portrait. So this identification between oil painting and cosmetics, which is positive in Boucher and Madame de Pompadour's hands, they're capturing the sense together, right, that she, with her as the actual artist herself, right? If she can apply makeup, she can also be the painter of this artwork. So there's a real agency in commissioning paintings. Madame de Pompadour not only paid for this painting and installed it in a strategic space where influential viewers would see it, she also dictated its construction, right? And so though she didn't literally take paint to canvas, this artwork, this painting, sets her up, positions her as the artist, right, with a kind of unusual agency and control here. So there's a very close identification between artist and patroness in this work, a kind of reversibility between Boucher and Madame de Pompadour. And she is embracing her capacity to paint herself, right, to define herself with the artist as her ally. And this painting, though we're looking at, again, an image of makeup, is a kind of radical threat in a way. Remember that she was born Jane Fish, right? She was born into the non-noble classes, but climbs up, right, claws up through self-fashioning, right, by beauty and sophisticated uses of agency, right? And this threatens the social order. So we see a woman not only just putting on makeup, but usurping masculine privilege and upending normative structures of patronage. And her rise, her ability to show off her patronage and self-determination and control over this artwork after being born Jane Fish, really threatens the foundations of the 18th century social order. So here's Boucher's portrait next to a true artist's self-portrait. The sitters here are two 18th century women holding brushes filled with pigment. Boucher, of course, shows us the king's former mistress applying cosmetics, projecting the sitter's agency and determination, a woman creating her own identity. The painting on your right is by the artist Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun. This is a self-portrait. And so here we see a painter, not the patroness. We see a painter self-portrait. She's looking at us in the act of painting, something that's not just suggested or implied like Boucher does, but is literal. She's holding a palette and oil paints. We see a canvas on the left-hand side of the painting. And the story of Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun betrays some problems facing women painters in the 18th and 19th centuries. She and another artist were the only two women to enter the highest art school in France, the Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture, in the year 1783. The Academy had no limits on the number of male artists it would accept, but there were only 4 women allowed each year. And this was deemed sufficient because it was thought to be much more rare for women to have any natural artistic talent. This is the 18th century. So women are excluded from participating in much of art, and were forbidden to study from nature, so to study the male nude, and therefore to paint mythological paintings or history paintings. So what do women artists do under these narrow circumstances? Well, they paint women. Women artists paint women. Like Boucher, Vigée-Lebrun sets herself up to enjoy the special protection of the monarchy. She aligns herself with someone in the court, specifically this sitter here, Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette was the queen. She was Louis XVI's wife, the queen in the late 18th century in France, and was an exact contemporary of Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun, so they were about the same age. Marie Antoinette wears a wide-brimmed hat in this portrait with a beautiful blue plume. She is wearing a white muslin dress with ruffles at the neck, a gold sash tied into a bow at her back, standing beside a table on which there is a vessel with flowers. And she's seen here, Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun shows her really at the height of fashion. This is kind of the most fashionable contemporary outfit you could wear. So Marie Antoinette, like Madame de Pompadour, uses patronage and uses portraits specifically to help shape her reputation. But, and this is critical, this is a woman commissioning paintings one generation after Madame de Pompadour. This is a very different historical moment than Madame de Pompadour's moment. This is a moment where there's this sort of creeping and increased rhetoric of virtue and modesty in circulation. This painting was one of 3 replicas of the same portrait. It was exhibited at the Salon of 1783, the biggest public exhibition of art at the time, but it had to be withdrawn because of the scandal caused by the cut of the dress worn by the Queen. This was seen as a sort of scandalously low cut to the dress. The white muslin was seen as being too transparent. And sort of politically, this dress, this hat, these were English fashions. So this was the height of fashion, but it was something English, which was a scandal for a queen of France to be shown as wearing. So this was a big scandal. And Marie Antoinette was criticized not only for the supposedly unseemly attire, but this taste for foreign-inspired fashion. So she's coming under fire here. This is a new moment in time. And Marie Antoinette would not be the best person to meet this new moment where modesty is held in such high regard in French history. And would become a very problematic and scandalous person for the artist Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun to attach her reputation to. By the middle of the 1780s, Marie Antoinette had become the focus of intense popular resentment and hatred, kind of the symbol of broader state policies and the government debt. So the spending, the sort of overspending of the monarchy that people were frustrated with in a time of economic crisis was tied to the queen, was tied to this woman. Here I'm showing you a movie still from the film Marie Antoinette, a 2006 film directed by Sofia Coppola. And this just shows kind of the reputation that Marie Antoinette had for extravagance and scandalous public behavior. She was emblematic of those values of pleasure and artifice and sensual delights that had been, right, really acceptable for the monarchy to celebrate, to be seen as, but were becoming, in the late 18th century, seen as out of control, threatening to bankrupt the state itself. So Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun has to manage both the virtue of herself and her subject, and amidst new calls to emphasize womanhood and femininity at this new moment in time. So the queen is being criticized. She's deeply hated by the public. There are new calls for moral virtues to come down from the monarchy. Again, this is something new and different. And so this portrait, also painted by Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun, was intended to prove to the French people, who, again, thought by this point that the queen was spending too much money, was foreign, was cold, was promiscuous. This painting was made in order to assert that no, instead she was a caring mother, right, a virtuous woman. There was this increasing pressure to assert female virtue by showing the queen as a mother, right, to enmesh her in this familial situation, right, not show her around cakes and champagne. And here we see, right, her with 3 of her children. There's a lively baby grasping at her breast, 2 other doting children, including one pointing at an empty cradle. And so this emphasizes her role as a mother, but there's a political purpose here too, right? Because not only is she a mother, she is the person who will produce the heirs to France. So she's not only a mother, she is important, right? She's important to the future of the nation here. There is, however, this painting didn't do all the work it needed to. There was this implicit threat in having a woman artist represent the queen. So the triumph of this woman painter of Vigée-Lebrun somehow led to this imagined ascendancy of Marie Antoinette's influence or power. So typically, the representation of women in art turns women into an object of the male gaze, an object of the artist, women sitters, kind of their agency is taken away. But when a woman is also the painter, this threatens in the minds of many people for the representation to give, right, women some more agency, right, political agency, artistic agency, even more than Boucher's portrait of Madame de Pompadour. It's seen as though the artist and the patron are colluding more, that women are given more power with their association with each other. And as I said, this is a different historical moment. Madame de Pompadour would have a long career in with agency over arts administration and cultural taste-making, but things would quickly fall apart for the young Marie Antoinette. Versailles would be stormed by an angry public. The queen will be imprisoned and guillotined. Here you see her, a small sketch of her that was done in the streets of Paris as she was carted away on her way to the guillotine. And so what does the artist do? Vigée Lebrun will flee France in the middle of its revolution. So she'll survive the kind of purge of the aristocracy and actually become a successful painter abroad to displaced members of the nobility. So patronage in this case offered a powerful association and an opportunity for a woman artist, but also served as a danger, right? As Marie Antoinette became a political flashpoint, Vigée Lebrun's life was actually in danger for a moment. So today we've discussed two 18th century women patrons of the arts. Both women patrons used art to try and control their reputations, their legacies, their power. Commissioning portraits for both was an act of self-determination and propaganda. For Marie Antoinette, however, this act was too late. She could bring up a woman artist and support her career, but she could not influence her reputation enough to save her own life.